Welcome to the Hope After Narcissistic Abuse podcast. I am your host, Amy Helms. Each week, you will hear from experts across the country and even world speak to you on recovering from narcissistic abuse and even how to manage these relationships. You will also hear some periodic solo episodes on how to manage these relationships and what recovery is like. It is my hope that you will leave each episode with some renewed hope that you can and will beat this. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to another episode of Hope After Narcissistic Abuse. Today's guest is Laura Symon. She is currently the owner of a psychotherapy practice called Into the Light of Mental Health and Consulting. She's also in the process of launching a course, which is now live and active, that is about learning to love the body you're in. The link will be in the show notes, so you can hop on and register. Today, we're talking about healthy sexuality. What does that mean? And how is this something that you can achieve? I know this is something a lot of us struggle with, especially after any kind of relationship that is not so healthy. So welcome, Laura. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Amy.
So I know this is a loaded question, but just start off, what is healthy sexuality?
Yeah, that is a great question to start with. And what might be healthy sexuality to you might be different than healthy sexuality to me. There's really no one definition to that, but healthy sexuality really needs to be consensual between either one person, if it's solo sexual exploration, or two people. And healthy sexuality is something that is free from shame, it's free from guilt, and you really ideally should be able to have fun with that and explore and really just have a good time. So that's what I would say healthy sexuality is.
I love that you said that it's different for everyone, because I know I see people coming into our practice that will ask me, is this normal? I'm like, well, is it normal for you? Is it normal for
Yes.
your partner? Because it might be normal for you, but not normal for me, or it could be normal for me and not them. You mentioned the word consent. Let's talk about that, because it's, is consent the first time? Is it every time? What would you call consent?
My take on consent has actually changed over the years. Earlier on in my career, I would have told you that consent was someone verbally saying yes to sex. And as I've grown and learned more, consent is a lot more about not only a verbal consent, but a body consent. So you can have someone that says yes with their mouth and their body is screaming, get back, no, I don't want this. And so incorporating some somatic principles, which is one thing that I do in my practice and with individuals that I work with, in, how do you convey to your partner that my body says this is okay? And then as a partner, how do you read that other individual? And if that other individual's body is saying, this is not okay with me, we have to respect that. So again, consent has changed over the years for me in my view of that and what that is. Also, we can't consent if someone is high or if someone is under the influence. And, there are a lot of people out there that think just because you're married or you are in a long-term partnership that, hey, you're free access, free game. And that is not the case. We see a lot of spousal rape, spousal abuse, and that is not consensual.
What about for consenting to different positions, different places, different times, stuff like that?
Yeah, and that varies by person.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned, Amy, earlier about being normal. There are going to be quote unquote normal, and I use air quotes with that because there really is no normal. But what might be normal for you at home might be a different normal when you're on vacation, or it might be staying curious to something, a new position, or experimenting in some way. But it's not going to be the same for each person. And each time you need to be able to give that consent. And it's okay to also say, you know what, I'm willing to try this. But then at the end of the day, if you're not comfortable with that, saying to your partner, you know what, I've changed my mind. This doesn't feel good. And that's why it's so important that both people know each other intimately, not only sexually, but emotionally, spiritually, physically, and they're able to read that other person.
Mhm. You know, my thought as you were talking about, trying these new things was we were talking before the show about, the role of pornography with healthy sexuality and how some of these ideas can pop into people's head about what's normal, what's not normal. What do you see with, pornography and how sexuality and, healthy and unhealthy sexuality has come into our culture?
Yeah, so I'm not going to put a label necessarily on pornography itself. There are times that I think pornography can be used to spice up things in the bedroom, and
Mm-hmm.
there are times it can be used educationally. In general, though, pornography tends to devalue women, and it has contributed greatly to the sex trafficking trade, the abuse of minors, and let's face it, pornography is not realistic. And so when you're with a partner and you have seen so much pornography, that partner thinks, well, gee, that position is normal, or the way that this person looks, this is now normal. That's not the case. We are living, breathing human beings. We're not robots, and we don't look the way that people typically look in pornography shows, videos, movies, pics. That's not how we look and how we feel. So it has definitely changed the way that we view ourselves as a society. We've been very sexualized, and typically that's not healthy. But again, there can be times that pornography can be used in a relationship to spice things up or to learn some things. I think the other side of pornography is that for anyone that has an addiction, pornography is not going to be a good thing for that relationship. And women many times see a spouse's use of pornography as a betrayal, and that can be seen as an intimate partner betrayal. So much like an affair, that partner is really feeling betrayed, like that other person has stepped out of the marriage. So all of that needs to be considered as well. And I work with, many partners of sex addicts, and betrayal is a real thing. So if pornography is used in that instance, that is not going to be healthy for that couple.
So in that case, it's different than a couple sitting down and watching it together, thinking just spice it up, or you know, it's kind of foreplay or something like that. Is different than just one partner exclusively watching it by themselves and then bringing it in or using it instead of with their spouse or partner.
Yes, which really then goes back to consent, right?
Yeah.
Are both partners okay with that?
Hmm.
Right? Because if one partner is saying, no, I don't want you to do that, and the other partner saying, well, I'm going to do it anyway, again, we get back into consent and what is okay in that relationship for both people.
So that kind of brings me to, we were talking about like education about sexuality and just the human body and everything that goes with that. You mentioned pornography is not real. It's exaggerated. It's not what our bodies look like, how we work. Um, what's your approach to education when people come to see you?
Yeah, it really depends on the person because, again, what's
Mhm.
normal, what's not. Um, I see a variety of clients from a variety of
Mhm.
backgrounds and cultures. And so, what I am going to be teaching to someone who has never had an orgasm before, or someone that has come from a very rigid religious family system where there has been no sex ed whatsoever, we're going to be going over very basic information versus someone maybe that has had multiple partners in their lifetime. We're going to be going over other information that's more in depth and detailed than I would that first person that I mentioned. So it really depends on the person, but we do go over things like consent. What areas of the body feel good? What areas of the body, this doesn't feel good to me. This doesn't feel safe to me. And how do I know what area feels good and what area doesn't? What are my body cues and body signals that tell me this feels okay? So those would be some of the things that I would talk about to any client that would come in, as long as they are comfortable with that. And so I really let my
Mhm.
client kind of lead that discussion. because not all individuals are comfortable talking about sexuality.
So let's say someone with a history of trauma, especially if it's sexual trauma, we see a lot of dissociation or a freeze response or, tightening. You talked about reading someone's body for consent as well. What do you do? What's your approach when someone comes in and they're telling you about, I freeze or I dissociate or it's painful? What advice do you give to them?
That's a great question that I think we have to proceed with caution in that area
Mhm.
and make sure, first of all, that that person is really okay discussing that. We know that talking too much about traumatic events actually increases the level of trauma and it reinforces it, which we do not want to do. But if they are open to discussing that, we talk about doing things like taking breaks frequently,
Mhm.
going and doing a different activity, and what types of things can you do during sex acts to make sure that you're more present. Because if you're disassociative or not fully present and aware, that actually is going to reinforce that freeze state or that freeze response in your body.
Mhm.
And so somatically, if we go back to the body and what the body's doing with that, if we're in a state of freeze, that literally is the closest to death that we will ever become, other than when we are under anesthesia.
Mhm.
So again, I would kind of go back to consent. Are we able to consent when we are under anesthesia? And if we're in a freeze state, probably not. So it's teaching people different techniques to know their body, to figure out what they like or what they don't like in their body, and then being able to use even some nonverbal cues to their partners to let them know that I'm not okay with this. We need to pause for a minute. And maybe we come back to that later, maybe we don't. It depends on the person and the situation.
Right. I know we're both somatically trained and we both do trauma work through the body. What are some ways you teach clients to listen to the body sensations, or recognize they're first coming on? What's your approach?
Most clients that I work with initially have zero clue what their bodies are saying to them, right? Because we are so trained as a society, well, think your way through this or feel your way through this. No, we don't pay attention to our bodies enough. And so it takes several sessions to be able just to inform them about what the body's doing and educating them before they can even recognize my body's having a response to this before I'm even having a thought to this. And so I encourage them to do things like check in with their breathing. What's my breathing? Well, it might be getting a little fast, or my heart might be beating a little faster than it usually does. Okay, let's sit with that for just a minute, right? Let's notice that. Let's pause whatever it is that we're doing. Let's notice it. Let's wait until the body comes back down from that so that we don't go into a state of overwhelm or into that state of freeze.
Yeah, and I see a lot of clients in my, but they're like, I'm fine. I'm like, well, you look like a plane's taken off and you're like prepared for it to crash. Your arms are braced and you're
Yeah,
like heading into the wind. And they're like, oh, now that you mention it, I do feel a little tight. Like, well,
yeah,
let's just notice what would happen. Can we try for a minute? Just lower your shoulders. They're like,
right.
oh, that does feel different. So some
Yeah,
of those
well,
simple things.
I always chuckle at the acronym FINE, what that actually stands for in the therapist community. I won't repeat that on a podcast, but, you know, uh, we're not fine when we say we're fine. Pick a different word. We are not fine. But yeah, those clients that literally they look like they could propel themselves out of the chair. That's because they're in that flight mode, right? I mean, they literally need to run out of there in order to discharge that energy from the nervous system. And if they're even doing that in our office or when we're working with them, think about how they actually are then in the act of sex. They're not comfortable with that. So it's really teaching the client in my practice to slow down, and not slow down all the way, slow down a little bit. If you're used to going 90 miles an hour, maybe we drop down to 87 or 88 miles an hour, slowing down just a little bit
Mhm.
so that the body can tolerate that.
Right. And somatically, we call that like titration. You're just doing little titrating drops. So your body gets used to it because going a lot can feel uncomfortable. if that's how you're used to living. So little chunks at a time.
Yeah, because it's scary to all of a sudden go
Yeah.
really, really fast to really, really slow, and just taking them just a little bit at a time, as you mentioned.
So you have, I mentioned in the beginning you were working on this course about loving the body you're in. Tell us more about that and, why you're doing this shift and what your work's going to be about.
I am so excited about this course. I've been in the field for quite a while, and I started to notice something in many of the women that I worked with. They were high functioning professionals. They had a history of trauma. They pushed through their nervous system, and their attachment styles tended to be a little bit more anxious versus
Mhm.
secure, or maybe they were more ambivalent attachment styles.
Yeah.
And we worked and worked and worked in therapy. And they just kind of hit this plateau where therapy just really wasn't doing it for them anymore. And with therapy, we are so constrained, with
Mhm.
insurance, and with regulations, and time. There's so many constraints. And so with the consulting and coaching that I do, we are able to do things in a different way and really dive in and help that individual learn to love whatever it is about themselves that they want to love. And then those other areas that they don't, let's work on those areas. Because as you and I both know, therapy only does so much. And there's a time
Mhm.
and place for therapy. And then we get to a point where we need to do something different. So learning to love the body that we're in, we talk about things like, how to move past trauma. How do I get to that next step? How do I level up in this area and move through the trauma and not stay in that mode of victim all the time? Talk about codependency and what that is, and kind of the other side of narcissism, right? And codependency and that wound that people have. How does that affect our sex lives and who we are? If there has been abuse and neglect, what type of things can we do, whether that's somatically, whether that's learning to get along with other individuals and have deep, intimate friendships, but really becoming our true, authentic selves. That is what learning to love the body that we're in is about. Just becoming us, right? Stepping
Mhm.
out, stepping up, and you hit a certain age where you really don't care what people think about you anymore. And I think so many people spend their young adult lives really looking for that affirmation from other people instead of really tuning into themselves and figuring out what is it that I like about me. So I'm really
Mhm.
excited to launch this.
That's beautiful. You used, well, two words that I think are key: high functioning. And I think it's the high functioning, seems like you're targeting women, but high functioning women that tend to deal more with shame and with this whole process, because successful, smart, high functioning women carry the narrative, I should know better, I should do better, I should be over this. Why am I still struggling? I'm sure you notice that too, or you wouldn't be doing this course. What can you speak on with these high functioning women that are dealing with shame and the I should have or I could have?
Yeah, I call those individuals the woulda, coulda, shouldas, right? That's the group, and that really indicates to me that shame response. And it's those individuals that are really the ones that almost need the most assistance from us, is to push through again to that next level and just letting them know it is normal not to be able to do everything on your own. We are human beings, and we are meant to be in relationships with other people, whether that's a romantic relationship, whether that's a friendship, whether that's a spiritual connection or a relationship with a higher power. We're not meant to be alone. And when you have very successful, again, high functioning women, you tend to think, I can do this by myself. I don't need anybody else because I've had to climb my way up the corporate ladder. And by golly, I've had to step on people. I've had to make my own name for myself. And the further you get up that ladder, the harder it is to talk to people in a true, authentic, vulnerable way and really share who you are with other individuals. And you tend to isolate more, which then, of course, as we know, increases shame. So it's like, how is it that I can connect with other people? How can I teach people that connecting with others is okay and it can be safe in the right environment? So it's actually teaching them a little bit more about safety and what is it like to co-regulate with people and to do that in an authentic, genuine manner. So that's something I'm, again, really excited about to share in that course as well.
Great. We also know that it's the high functioning, successful, smart women that tend to pair in those abusive relationships. And then that isolation kind of, it makes it a little bit worse because they don't have that confidant to share it with and they further question. So it's like a perfect storm to make them the ideal candidate for things like this.
It is, because we know, that those people with more of the narcissistic tendencies tends to pair well in the beginning with individuals that tend to be a little bit higher functioning, but that tend to have more codependent tendencies, right? They each feel a need for the other person. And, a lot of times that kind of instant attraction, that very quick, that very fast attraction to someone else feels really great to both people in the beginning. But we're usually, again, dealing with individuals that have more of an avoidant attachment style, as with somebody with either a narcissistic personality disorder or some narcissistic traits. But then also people that more have an anxious attachment style or an ambivalent attachment style in individuals with the codependent tendencies. And they pair really well together in the beginning. And then when it gets bad really, really quickly. And there's a lot of abuse that can occur.
It's great info to add. And for those that aren't familiar with the attachment styles, I'll give a brief overview in the show notes because we're throwing out a lot of therapeutic terms. So I'll give a brief overview and some links in the show notes for people that aren't aware. So just one more time so that people won't miss you, where can they find info about your course?
So my course can be found at laurasymon.com. And my last name is spelled Synon. So laurasymon.com. And I'll have a couple of different courses up there. But again, the Learning to Love the Body that you're in is the one that will be opening in January. And I'd really recommend that, again, to women that feel like they need a little bit more and, again, want to level up and do something a little bit differently. I'm going to have some live Facebook groups with that, and we'll also have different communities that people can join to really have that support that they need. They can also visit my regular website, which is intothelightmentalhealth.com, and that's where you can find my regular psychotherapy practice.
Yes, and all of that will be linked in the show notes for you to hop on and sign up. Thank you again, Laura. It was great to have you on here. I appreciate it. Thank you again for tuning in to our podcast, Hope After Narcissistic Abuse. We hope you were able to leave with some renewed hope. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe to the channel, give us a review, head to the show notes for more information on the things that we highlighted. And there's also a link to the website for a course that we offer on the same topic, Hope After Narcissistic Abuse. Thank you again, and please tune in to the next episode.